Do we have any apologies?
We do, Convener. We've got apologies from Deputy Provost Balfour, Councillor Aitchison and Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at this meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Agenda item 3, minute of the meeting of the Scrutiny Committee held on 25th of March, pages 2 to 9, your agenda papers. Can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, rolling action log, pages 10 to 12 in your agenda papers, and we'll go to Mr. Curry for that.
Thanks, Convener. This is just a record of items of business that the committee has asked for and which are due to come forward. You'll see there's nothing outstanding. All the reports are in progress. Item 701 is a BMD report, and I think members were pleased to visit last week to BMD to see the operation in practice, so I think that was quite useful. All other reports are in progress and will come as planned.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 5, 2024 Leavers Attainment Outcomes Report, pages 13 to 34 on your agenda papers. We'll go to Jill to speak to that report.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is highlighting the 2024 Leavers data. So essentially what that is every year a cohort of young people leave our schools across Falkirk area, and collectively those young people and their attainment data constitute what we call the Leavers cohort data. It is the best measurement by which we can understand school progress and how our young people are performing compared to various comparators. Generally speaking, you'll be aware young people are sitting exams at the moment, and there's a little bit of a flurry of activity in September when young people get their Scottish qualifications around about that day through their door, through their exam results, etc. But there is now a recognition that there's a much wider range of attainment that would constitute a learner's achievement portfolio, and that learning happens throughout the school year. So although we're used to quite a flurry of activity in August and September, our best point to measure attainment is when we've actually got all the Leavers information. So generally speaking, that is published by the Scottish Government in March. So then that's the point at which we've got all that information. And then very shortly after that, we obviously bring this report to you with the sort of the Leavers cohort of information. This paper itself highlights all of that information. So everything that is published nationally, you have in here with a little bit more information and a little bit of background for your information. And I would just like to say today that the paper we are bringing to you shows a continuing strong picture for Falkirk young people and the Leavers cohort. We have areas of really strong performance, which you'll see throughout the paper. We're very proud of the performance of our young people when they leave our schools, and we're very proud of the hard work that everybody puts into ensuring that these outcomes are incredibly strong and continue to be so. So that is the paper here at the moment. We're just asking you to note the strong levels of attainment achieved by our Leavers in this cohort, and also note the areas for improvement that we look at within this paper. It's worth noting that the areas for improvement highlighted in this paper are just for a very strong picture to get stronger. There are no areas that we're sitting here where we're thinking there is an area of concern or worry. We're starting off from a baseline of real strength, so we're really pleased with this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jill. I've got a question. The report mentions that a refreshed attainment strategy is currently under development. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit about it?
Certainly, Chair, thank you. Okay, so obviously we're a new management team within the Education Service, and we do come with a background of looking at and raising attainment and the strategies to raise attainment. So when we started, we have launched a programme of raising attainment activities. Now that will involve across our 8 mainstream secondary schools specifically, but extending out into our other secondary schools as well. We're looking at discussing attainment at quite a detailed level with each of our school leadership teams. So what that essentially looks like is we spend a half day with every school leadership team and really getting into the detail of the attainment within that particular establishment. Now that involves high quality professional dialogue with the teacher and his or her deputies, and sometimes other members of staff. We go into real detail about the key strengths and what is leading to those strengths. We go into detail about the areas that we maybe want to put a little bit more focus on. And then the upshot of those conversations, and we have just had them within the last month, is an agreement and an understanding about the types of things in that school's improvement plan. So what we're essentially doing is we're collectively discussing the individual schools' attainment profiles in forensic detail with a view to creating a really high quality improvement plan in partnership with the school, and to make sure that the improvement plan is really focused on improvement and raising outcomes or improving outcomes for young people. Again, what I keep coming back to is we do have a strong attainment profile, so all of those conversations there is a lot of celebration in all of those conversations. And again, we take every opportunity we can to kind of thank and celebrate the head teachers of our schools. But obviously with all attainment, we always want to seek perfection. So those are the types of things that will come out in the course of those conversations to ensure that they are then embedded within the school's improvement plan and they are then taking those forward. So that happens in March, around about this time when this data is released. We do that half day per school. And then the schools then go with their improvement plans. We've got a very strong central team of quality improvement officers that will then engage in an ongoing way with the schools about their attainment and their improvement plans. And then we will do those half day visits again in September at SQA data time. So although that's not published data that happens in September when the exam results come out, it's highly important tracking and monitoring data, internal tracking and monitoring data. So we replicate those discussions in September, again with a view just to understand and what it looks like and maybe be tweaked within the improvement plan, etc. But it's a real partnership process. We're calling it the Performance Improvement Programme, and as I say, we are very keen to work in very close partnership with the schools just to ensure that we are all focused on the right things. I think what's really important as well is where we've got key messages throughout those programmes, we bring those back to the central team so that our strategic plans for the central team are also pointed towards sort of collective areas for improvement. So it means then we're kind of looking at things from two different angles.
Yeah, thanks very much for that comprehensive answer, Jo. I've got another question. There was a decrease in the number of leavers who moved on to further education, yet there was an increase in the number who moved on to employment at higher education. I wonder if you could tell us a wee bit about that and how that happened.
Yeah, so obviously across positive destinations, all three of those destinations are classed as positive. So those three destinations are classed as positive in as much as they are moving on to a destination where they can either continue their learning or they can go on and gain employment and earn a salary, essentially. You will find variations year on year depending on the young people and the cohorts, and often you might see a drop in further education, which is it's sometimes college, but it's sometimes sorry, I know that's a tricky thing to say, but generally speaking, further education you would assume is college, but it's just basically at the level of learning that they're going on to. So if you're going to SCQF level 7 and above, then that's classed as, sorry, SCQF 8 and above, that's higher education, and up to SCQF level 7, that would be further education. Essentially what's happening now is our schools are providing a bigger range of SCQF qualifications. So historically, obviously, we were focused more on SQA qualifications and hires and advanced hires, etc. Our schools are starting to introduce a wider range of SCQF qualifications, which might mean then that they don't need to go into college to do those types of qualifications, and then they can go to other places. But again, it's not an exact science, and it might be that we've just got a greater number of young people who wish to seek employment or wish to seek higher education. But generally speaking, all three of those are positive. And we would try and understand on a school level if there was a particular issue with a particular qualification. But generally speaking, at an aggregated level across those three, it's a positive picture.
I was going to just show my ignorance here. Jill, SCQF, SQA, can you just explain the two acronyms and the difference between them, please?
Certainly, my apologies. Okay, so SQA is Scottish Qualifications Authority, and Scottish Qualifications Authority is the main awarding body in Scotland, which awards national fives, hires.
That's the one I know, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that is more commonly known. SCQF is the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework. So that essentially is a framework which is an independent body which basically benchmarks all the qualifications. So, for example, if you went to look at things like, I'm trying to think of an example, City and Guilds, for example, that type of qualification, it's not an SQA qualification, but it would be accredited within the framework, so we understand equivalence. So things like Open University qualifications, that's not an SQA qualification, but it is accredited on the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework, and then we understand if we're looking at an SCQF Level 7 qualification, that might be an advanced higher, which is the SQA, or it might be a different awarding body's equivalent at SCQF Level 7. So we know it's the same difficulty level. So essentially, it's like a benchmarking organisation that allows you to compare like for like. And if we go into the no wrong path agenda, more and more we're trying to look at, yes, SQA is incredibly important, but what else? What else is there in terms of additional qualifications for young people? So it's really important that we use the SCQF to make sure that we're including all these qualifications for the wider understanding for our young people.
I'm glad I asked that question, Provost. Brilliant answer. I'm not too sure if I asked Jill another question, but quite it's clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll now go to Councillor Binney.
Thank you, Provost. Just to say, overall, a very positive report. Well done, everybody. However, I note a dip in the data, all leavers average complementary tariff score on page 25. I'm pleased to read the narrative that we're moving forward and there will be increased focus on improving this outcome in the year ahead. However, it's known strong attendance is linked to strong attainment. Can you advise or inform me if any such focus will be spent in this area to support all our young people improving their future lives? Thank you, Jill.
Jill.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Binney. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we are going to talk a little bit about some of our attendance work in the next paper, which is the Strategic Equity Fund paper. But generally speaking, do you have a universal focus on attendance and the importance of attendance? One of the areas that we do discuss at the performance improvement programme that I spoke about previously is attendance. So we spoke about it was leavers data in March and then SQA data in September. We also do talk about attendance exclusions, etc., because we do understand if young people are not attending, then of course they're not attaining because they're not learning. So we do take this story particularly seriously, particularly post-COVID. We do understand that that is a really crucial part of us raising attainment and ensuring our young people are achieving at their absolute optimum. So universally, yes, we have a focus on it through the performance improvement programme, and also as well in a targeted way. When we go into the CEF paper, there are particular targeted interventions for young people who are struggling to attend or whose attendance profile is not as strong as we would like it to be.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Councillor Binney. We'll now go to Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Jill. Good morning to you. I'd like to echo Councillor Binney's remarks here, and I would just like to congratulate everyone. The report is certainly very positive, and that is good. So can I first of all congratulate everyone involved in making the wonderful achievement possible. Teachers, all the staff, and especially the school pupils, who have all done magnificently well in their achievement and gaining their qualifications. A few questions, Jill, I wonder if you can just answer them for me. The authority has generally performed very well on the measure against comparators. I wonder if you can explain to me the process involved in gaining the figures, the size of the cohort to determine the figures gained, and then is there any differences in performance in individual schools, and how can we deal with that? And if there is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Could you ask that first question again? I'm sorry, I struggled to pick it up. Apologies.
Right. So basically, you want me to go through the full thing again? Because I think it's important because it all kind of ties in. So what
Okay,
I've
yeah.
said is the authority has generally performed very well on the measure against comparators. I wonder if you can explain to me the process involved in gaining the figures and the size of the cohort to determine the figures gained.
Okay, thank you. So essentially the figures by which we are compared, the virtual comparator is the way that we compare our data, so the main way by which we compare our data. So in any given year when we have a cohort of young people, we have, say for example, and I'll use a round number, it's not the exact number in the paper, but if we had 100 young people leaving Falkirk Council schools in 2024, each one of those 100 young people have a unique profile of characteristics that make them unique. So if I was one of those 100 young people leaving Falkirk Council schools in 2024, I am female, I am leaving school by the end of S6, I am not ASN, so I do not have an additional support need, and I live in an SIMD decile 1 postcode. So my gender, my stage, my ASN profile and my SIMD profile. Those 4 characteristics are the 4 main characteristics statistically which will impact my attainment. So there's been quite a bit of statistical analysis and research done, and those are the 4 main things a young person's attainment profile. So what the tool does that gathers and collates all this information is it essentially says, right, there's Jill, those are her 4 characteristics. Let's go and find 10 other people in Scotland with exactly those 4 same characteristics. Take those 4 people, 10 people's attainment profiles and average them. They then compare Jill against the average of those 10 others. And what that does is it gives a really good comparison about whether Falkirk Council is adding value to Jill compared to the value that could have been added to Jill had she gone to a different school in a different local authority. So essentially what then happens is Jill is one of 100 leavers and her 10 comparators sit in a virtual comparator pot. There are then each of whom have their own 10 virtual comparator pupils, and those 990 pupils sit in a virtual comparator pot. So what you then have is you've got the 100 strong pot from Falkirk Council, and then you've got a 1,000 strong pot that's the virtual comparator pot. And what you then do is you're able to then see like for like characteristic comparison, whether or not Falkirk Council is adding value to those 100 young people compared to the overwhelmingly through our paper is our young people are getting more value added to them in Falkirk Council schools than would have been added to them had they gone to a different school in a different local authority. So that is probably the most important comparator, and it's probably the most it's the most realistic comparator, because with the best will in the world, if you're just comparing against the national average all the time, then all you're doing is comparing against an average. And if you're just comparing against the Regional Improvement Collaborative, which is the Forth Valley Regional Improvement Collaborative, then again, that's just another average. Whereas if you compare against the virtual comparator, what you're actually looking at is like for like with the young people you've got, are you adding enough value? So that is how the virtual comparator is made up, and that's how we compare ourselves. And that would be the go-to comparator out of all of the ones we've published here, that we would say that is one that tells us best about whether we're adding value or not. Okay, does that answer the first part of that?
That's the first part, yes. Another part was, if using the information gained, if there are differences noted in other schools, how do we deal with that?
Okay, thank you. Yes, good question. So what you're looking at here is a local authority aggregated picture for all of our schools. This contains the data for the 8 mainstream secondary schools. So what we have in a tracking and monitoring version, so I speak about the difference between accountability data and reporting data, which is your aggregated picture, and then the additional nuanced data that sits underneath it, that's school by school. That information is used as tracking and monitoring information, essentially, so internal data to allow us to really target improvement. So within the tool that we got this information from the high-level aggregated data, the tool also allows schools to go in individually to look at their own data, to understand their own picture. So if I refer back to those 100 young people leaving Falkirk, and the 1,000 virtual comparator pupils, schools also have a version of that for themselves. So if a school have 50 young people leaving their school, they will have a virtual comparator pot of 10 times that by which they are compared. And that is, again, a direct comparison based on characteristics. So what that allows us to do is it allows us to go into the sort of the real detail and the forensic understanding about how an individual school is performing, where they're adding value compared to the young people, sorry, for their young people in their school compared to what could have been added if they go to a different school in a different location. So that forms the basis of the really forensic conversations that happen at the performance improvement meetings. I think we've created a really good, safe, reflective, trusting space where we're able to really explore improvement and really focus on really taking that step and taking things forward. Again, though, those conversations are always incredibly positive. Each of our schools perform incredibly well. They've all got areas where we would like to be celebrating, etc. So, but as with every average, there's always areas where you'd like to bring up and bring up and bring up. But it's just in the pursuit of excellence. So those are the individual conversations that we have at school level in both March and September. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill. Very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Robertson, yes. And we'll now go to Councillor Forrest.
Thanks, Jill. Hi. It's very, I think it's fantastic with a huge amount of data. So much so that my head was spinning with it. So thank you. Most of my questions you've already answered. It would round about the virtual comparator. I was going to ask Councillor Robertson's asked a good number of them already, but how exacting is the virtual comparator? Because further down it states that for several outcomes, Falkirk Council outperformed the virtual comparator by a significant margin, more than it has done over the past 5 years. Is there a reason for this?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly our nationally schools are getting better at looking at data and seeking their own areas for improvement. And I think in the last 5 years, we've seen a really positive trend with our schools in terms of their interrogation of data and then that real pursuit of areas for improvement. So I think what you are seeing here is an increasingly embedded practice of really pursuing excellence and pursuing the areas for improvement. So what we have here is almost like a matrix of information that allows school to really home in on the places where they really need to look at improvements. And our schools are incredibly good at that. They are very data literate and becoming increasingly more so. And so that's why you're starting to see that kind of real kind of improvement compared to the virtual comparator. I say again, I mean, obviously we don't want to make sweeping comparisons out with the scope of Falkirk Council, but it is an incredibly strong attainment profile. We have a comprehensive catchment in Falkirk, which essentially means we have a wide range of socioeconomic areas within the council, and for that profile, this is an incredibly strong attainment profile, and one we're very, very proud of. And the head teachers, that is thanks in most to the head teachers in the schools and the staff that work within the schools in terms of that pursuit, pupil by pupil, for excellence at every turn. So we are pleased to see that improvement. We are hoping it will continue as we continue with that work. But yeah, I would the hard work of the staff, but also the increased focus on data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
John Reid's going to come in now.
Thank you, Provost and Councillor Forrest. Just to add to what Jill said, the reason an authority overall in their data improves and you outperform virtual comparators because individual school. So the authority has targets, and we support schools in trying to meet their individual targets. So schools have individual targets. What happens in a school is that they then have discussions with the principal teachers and individual departments. When they get better, that's as a result of individual class teachers working really hard with young people in their classrooms. So it's a knock-on effect. teacher improves, department improves, individual school improves, authority improves. And what our role is in the central team is to make sure all of that is supported with the right CPD, with the right tools, such as the digital tools they need, with the Strategic Equity Fund, with a focus on learning and teaching, with conversations around the type of curriculum we're offering. So it's not just SQA stuff, it's all the stuff that's in SCQF. And then making sure that we target individuals and families that require additional support to achieve their very best. So it's a whole system approach, and that's the reason we're seeing year-on-year improvements.
And Pina, could I ask just one other thing? Sorry, John. The report demonstrates that there's significant improvements have been made over several, that's a word thing, several attainment outcomes. What ones are these that have had a significant improvement? And what ones haven't been? Is there something that we can learn from that?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so this year in particular, we're very proud of our positive destinations figure. So that's probably a standout in as much as it is something that we have been focusing on and we are very proud of. Our positive destinations data is obviously the percentage of people that go on to a positive destination post-school. It reached 96.5% this year, which is the highest we've got in 5 years, possibly longer than that, but obviously within the data set we've got at the moment, it's the highest in 5 years. Literacy and numeracy data, we are particularly strong in terms of our literacy and numeracy data compared to other schools and other local authorities, and that's from performance across from SCQF level 3 to all the way to SCQF level 6. So SCQF level 6 is higher equivalent, and SCQF level 3 national. But those figures are also incredibly strong across the entire profile in terms of the authority. I think in terms of our tariff scores, we have particular strength in our total tariff scores. So what we see in Falkirk is we've got schools who are very, very focused on the no wrong path agenda and wider qualifications out with the SQA portfolio. I think we are recognising that there is a need to look outside, continue to focus on the core for SQA, because yes, they are absolutely important currency for some young people, but for the wider cohort, there is obviously a need to look wider for wider qualification opportunities. So the total tariff points, where you're looking at a total tariff calculation, that really celebrates breadth of learning. So where you've got somewhere that got a real focus on lots of different types of qualifications, we'll see that through a total tariff. I think that the one area, and again, I feel that I keep saying this, but the one area which is still incredibly strong, but not as strong as these other areas, possibly are complementary tariff points. So complementary tariff is more around the depth of for a subset of young people. So again, we're outperforming and we're strong in that area, but we would like to be head and shoulders the same as all our other measures. So that is one of the areas that we're focusing on this year and moving forward.
Great answer. Thank you very much.
Jill, I wonder if you maybe just explained what the tariffs are.
Certainly, thank you. Okay, so is the attainment measuring tool. It's very, very difficult to aggregate things when it's lots and lots of different things. So what the Scottish Government did at the beginning stages of Insight, which is the tool that measures this attainment, is it using the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework as a yardstick, essentially. It created a tariff scale by which all qualifications that sit on the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework could be measured. So what it essentially does is it takes the difficulty of a qualification and the volume or the size of the qualification, and it assigns it a tariff score. So for example, a higher is at SCQF level 6. So 6 is used as a multiplier, and it has 24 SCQF credits, which means a notional 240 hours worth of learning in it. So the Insight tool takes the 6 and the 24 and it multiplies it together to give that qualification a tariff score. So that happens for every qualification that sits within the Insight tool on the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework. And then what happens is within Insight, what it does is for every learner, it takes the portfolio of qualifications. So I'm Jill, spoke to you about my characteristics, but I've got, let's say I've got 9 qualifications altogether. I've got 2 advanced hires, I've got 3 hires, and I've got 4 national 5 qualifications. Insight takes those 9 things, gives each one a number, and then gives me a total for those 9 things. So I then have a total tariff score. That is the total tariff score. When I spoke about a breadth of learning, if I'm adding more qualifications in, that makes my total tariff score go up. So that's then aggregated, and you can see a total tariff score per cohort within a school, or per a local authority. The complementary tariff score, by comparison, essentially takes the best 5 things that I got and just gives the tariff points for those best 5 things. So the complementary tariff score doesn't recognise the breadth of learning in the same way, because all the extra things, if it's not one of my best 5, won't count anyway. So when you're looking at a complementary tariff score graph, you're essentially looking how good is the best 5, so how deep are the best 5. So that's how the tariff score works within Insight, but it doesn't escape anywhere outside of Insight. It's an analytical tool used to understand the attainment within this tool that we measure attainment with. It's not like I leave with a certificate with a tariff score on it. That's not how the tariff works. It's purely for calculation methodologies within the tool, just to allow us to understand and benchmark and improve attainment. It is worth pointing out that this method of measuring attainment is not about individual pupils. Although it uses individual pupil data to understand trends, patterns, it is purely to allow us to understand performance and understand improvement. When you're talking about the pupil by pupil performance, that obviously has to be done at a school level, through tracking and monitoring, through UCAS, through these types of things to ensure that the young person is being supported to their best positive destination. So they're quite different, but obviously the tariff score is important for the use of Insight for us to understand that aggregated information. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. We'll go to Councillor Aiken now.
Morning, guys. Just while we're talking about the complementary tariff scores, the gap between Falkirk Council and the virtual comparator, it is persisting and it's widening. You did say that there was increased focus this year on improving that. What are the plans to improve it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So one of the things that we are looking at is around pace and challenge of learning and teaching in the broad general education. So broad general education is 1st to 3rd year pupils, and what we know is that we need to really focus on transferable skills, higher order thinking skills, opportunities for pace and challenge within the broad general education, so that young people have a really solid foundation to progress into their national qualifications phase, which is the senior phase. So what we are doing now, I think there has been a big focus because of the change in qualifications and the new types of qualifications. Schools have really been focusing on making sure that we've got all the right qualifications in the senior phase, we've got ideal opportunities for young people in the senior phase, and that is correct. And I think a really good job of that. And we're now at a point where we're saying, right, well, now how do we ensure that our young people are as well prepared as possible to access that? So one of the main ways we do that is through that kind of depth of learning in the broad general education, and making sure that we've got opportunities for young people to really extend their learning as far as possible and the problem solving skills as far as possible in the broad general education. So one of the main things we're doing we have senior leader networks within the authority now. So we've introduced networks where we bring the 8 schools together and our ASN schools, so we bring our mainstream and ASN schools leadership teams together to our secondary networks, and we really focus on what that looks like. So how do we provide that pace and challenge to allow young people to progress into sort of deeper learning in the national 5 higher, advanced higher levels? So what we find is that the key messages from these papers and this attainment story feeds into all of the work that we're doing both at local authority and school level. And again, what you'll find is school by school as well, some of our schools are adding value in this area, and some of our schools are still working on this as an area for improvement. And what we do is we try and say, well, we try and learn from the schools who are adding value in these areas, and then they share practice, and we work together to try and kind of understand how we might make changes elsewhere. But again, I think when we're looking at these differences with the complementary tariff scores, they're actually the comparison between the local authority and the virtual comparator isn't what we call significant. So although there is a gap, and that is an area that we are focusing on, it's not classed as a significant gap, which means they do statistical significance testing on this to make sure that it's absolutely true to a fault, essentially. And what we're saying is at the moment is, although it looks like this in the graphs, and it does show that there is a bit of work to do, it's not what they call significant. So it's not something that it's not something that would be raised as an issue because there is no significance there. But again, we strive to be as much above the virtual comparator across every measure as we can, so we are looking at working in that area.
Yeah, and maybe just add to that if that's okay. I mean, I think just to clarify, the page that you're maybe referring to in the report is page 25, is that right? Yeah. And although there's a 20-point difference compared to 2020, there's a 58-point difference, and it has varied slightly from 23 to 24, but as Jill's explained, it's not statistically significant. I think need to bear in mind as well, it's 20 tariff points, which is a tiny amount. I think that would be equivalent to half a national 4 or something, so it's not even the equivalent of a whole award that those pupils have got compared to us, and it could be the difference between somebody getting a B in one of the exams they sit compared to an A in one of the exams they sit. So that's where the work of the school and the principal teachers and the teachers come in to really try and push as many pupils as possible up to the highest levels of attainment in individual subjects. And that's the stuff that schools scrutinise, and we are aware of, and we support schools with that. But that's the average complementary tariff score. What there's lots of debates and discussions you can have. What one's more important? Is it average or is it total? In my mind, what is important are the entire set of qualifications that a young person walks out of school with in their back pocket, because that's what's going to allow them to access a job or into college or into uni. Or whatever it is that they're wanting to do onto further training. So what are we giving them? What is the currency that they have when they walk out of school? And in my mind, that's the total tariff score that does that, because it's the breadth of learning they're doing. And that is what I think contributes to stronger positive destinations. The average complementary is more about very precise and very forensic analysis of individual subjects and individual grades, and schools are working on that. That will be front and centre of their work as they're analysing their results.
Great, that's brilliant, thanks very much. And just overall, it's a fantastic report, well done.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, John, that this one will be for you. There seems to be some evidence of persistent non-attendance. How can we encourage better attendance, and what impact would it be if we don't address this? And I'm just wondering, is there evidence available from other authorities, maybe interventions that they have made to improve attendance levels, and have we engaged with or consulted parents and pupils to help identify areas that we can improve upon?
Malcolm, and we are going to touch on attendance in the next report, but just to say that there's a recognised national issue with overall levels of attendance, particularly following the pandemic, and we keep harping back to that. It's 5 years ago now, isn't it? But we are seeing signs of recovery in our general levels of attendance, but there's an attendance strategy that's supported by the strategic equity funding and pupil equity funding in individual schools. So there's work going on at authority level, there's work going on at individual school level. All of that data is analysed in the same way as this attainment data is analysed, and there's general work on attendance, but there's very specific work on attendance that happens with particular individuals as well. And you know that we provide support through our schools, but we also provide support through the likes of the Interrupted Learners service that we run, with outreach work that we've got, and with family support workers and education welfare officers. So there's a whole team of people tackling attendance.
That's fantastic, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Robertson. We'll now go to Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Provost. I've had a long experience stroke connection as a parent council member, and obviously as a councillor with Youth Primary School, and particularly with Larbert High School. And what really impresses me, and it comes out in these reports, is quite a number of things. It's the real positivity across, the real enthusiasm and the real drive to not after the top performers, but to look after every child and help them in every way, and every family as well. And that comes across time after time. And speaking about Larbert High, it's through the senior leadership team, past and present, and the teamwork that they do. And it's obvious from the report and the comments today and Jill's enthusiasm about statistics that this has been continued to the senior leadership team across the authority. And the question I'd like to ask actually is looking at, and it leads on from that, because positive destinations is a key and most important thing for every child to make sure that they go on to a positive career. You've got excellent results. I just wondered, the majority of the destinations you will know before the child leaves either S4 or S6 to go on to whatever. I just wonder what actions you take to follow up with that. And there will be a tiny percentage of children, or pupils I should say, where you're still trying to find out where they've gone to, which actually add to your figures. So I just wonder if you could comment on that, please.
I'll maybe comment on that first of all. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And it's absolutely true that we're looking after all learners in Falkirk. I mean, young people only get one chance at going through school, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they leave with the very best and into the highest quality destination that they possibly can. And when you look at the data for our lowest attaining 20% young people on page 26, it's almost our young people who are within that grouping almost attain double what they do compared against the virtual comparator, and that's a terrific endorsement of the curriculum and the support that individual class teachers and individual schools are providing. We work moving into a positive destination doesn't just happen when you're ready to leave school. Through the Developing the Young Workforce programme that's prevalent through our primary schools and in our BGE within secondary schools, there's a lot of work going on with cohorts, with year groups, with different groups of pupils, with individual pupils, about planning for what their destination is. And in some cases, it's about exposing young people to things that they might never have thought possible, and taking them to places where they might not thought of going. So those programs are prevalent in all of our schools, and really being ambitious and aspirational for each and every young person. We're just about to form a strategic advisory board in partnership with Forth Valley College, and the reason behind that is to make sure that we can increase the number of young people that are moving into further education, because we know that if you start learning at SCQF level 7 and above when you leave school, that has got a significant impact on your lifetime earnings. And if those are people that are staying within the Falkirk area, that's about the economic prosperity of the Falkirk area. So it's a big deal. We need to take account of all the stuff that's going on with the Freeport, with the growth deal, and we're right in there and we're tapping into that so that our young people are being equipped with the right skills to move into those high quality destinations. But there will always be a number of people, for whatever reason, are unable to move into positive destination. It could be health-related issues, for instance. The important thing is that the story of each of those individuals is known by every school, and it doesn't, when they leave school, the support doesn't just stop. Schools will continue to provide whatever support is required to try and transition that young person into a positive destination. Might not be in time for the capture date, but that's not the way we operate. We'll continue to try and provide the support, and also utilising the experience of our other partners, such as Skills Development Scotland and colleagues, for instance, in the Employment Training Unit. So there'll never be a point where anybody's just written just because they haven't met a positive destination when they're ready to leave school. So it's constantly checking, and that's linked to the structure and investment we've made through our PEF and SEF programmes, but also in the pupil support structures that exist within our secondary schools.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that extra detail, which is really enlightening. So, and the extra work that's gone into it. Thank you very much, and thank you, Provost.
Thanks very much, Mr. Flynn. Any other questions? Mr. Regan?
Page 30. The Falkirk Council has a smaller percentage who are unemployed and not seeking work, and unemployed and seeking work compared to the virtual comparator. But it's highlighted in red. I would have thought that would have been a positive thing. Maybe I just don't understand it, but could you explain it?
Sorry, excuse me, give me 2 seconds, I'm just finding the page. Yeah, so you are correct, and in actual fact what has happened there, I suspect, is when we've edited it, it's been a conditional formatting whereby if it's the difference between the council and the virtual comparator is one way, we made it green and red the other, but in actual fact we want those ones to be lower than the virtual comparator, so they're just highlighted incorrectly. So I apologise for that. I didn't notice it till just now. Apologies. They should be green.
Yeah, we want it to be lower, so that's
Yeah.
good that it is lower. Yeah, but it should be green and not red. It's just red because it is lower.
So it was.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a positive thing then.
It is,
should be.
yes.
That's brilliant.
Well spied, thank you.
Any other questions? I've just got a couple of general questions. When it says all leavers literacy, SCQF level 5 and 6 and 3 and 4 and stuff, is there a definition of what that means? Level 3 and 4 achieving at that level, and what you should be achieving, because it doesn't mean a lot. Maybe if you read that, but if you know 5 and 6, you should be at this level, really.
Yeah.
So is there a definition somewhere?
I'll quickly just explain that. It's all benchmarked against a set of expectations and standards, but essentially the majority of young people get their literacy qualifications through taking English, and so they automatically get the literacy award as well. So if they're taking English, it could be at National 3 level, it could be at National 4 level, National 5, and when it gets to SCQF level 6, that's higher English, if you like. There are some other subjects that contribute to that measure as well, and there, I won't go into the detail of that, but so you might not be taking English, but you might be taking one of the other subjects that contributes to it. But we also have, and what schools are very good at doing is, I might only be capable of getting National 5 in English, and that's as high as I'm going to get in that subject. But I might get level 6 in literacy. So schools can deliver programmes and can assess my literacy separately. So I might have National 5 in English, but I might be able to get level 6 in literacy. And that is the same for numeracy as well, that works in the same way as mainly through maths, but separate numeracy awards as well.
My final question is looking at themes and trends. In the report, it tells you SCQF level 5, 6, etc. But it doesn't actually break down how many students took maths, for example, or chemistry, or so I'm thinking if you're trying to get a handle on how many folks might be looking to move towards STEM careers, so it would give you an idea there's more people taking maths or more people take. So is there some information on that we'll look at? Yeah,
so just to, this is about the percentage of leavers in total. What we have is a whole other data that breaks down subjects. So we know how many young people took higher maths, and we know in each individual school how many took higher maths, and we know in each how they performed, and we can compare that against all the different comparators as well. That's to do with the structure of the curriculum and schools, but it's about us planning our curriculum intelligently with our partners like Skills Development Scotland, so we know the jobs that are in demand in the local area and across the country, and what we should be doing and what we are doing is planning our curriculum to allow young people to access those jobs so they've got the right skills. So we know all of that as well, and perhaps what we could do at some a briefing to members of the committee to explore some of the data around the number of different people taking different subjects and qualifications. That would be a good idea. And just a kind of final observation is the digital transformation, the iPads and everything that made a difference to attainment. Remember, we had a presentation up in the municipal chambers one time, and the pupils were there, they were in their teacher would say, have you considered this, for example, in an English essay or something? So has that interaction made a big positive difference? Yes, absolutely, definitely has. In my view, it's one of the most important decisions the council ever made in terms of capital decisions within education, out with the learning estate and out with the buildings. It absolutely has, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing improved levels of attainment, because young people are able to access their learning resources 24/7. Young people are able to get more regular, higher quality feedback from their teachers through those devices that they previously couldn't have got. And they're also able to access a broader curriculum with the likes of the virtual learning classes that we've got. And I'm not saying teachers are responding 24/7. Of course they're not. But young people are interacting with each other in their classes and helping each other. They're able to access things they previously couldn't access. And if we're talking about attendance, if they're off and they're genuinely ill, they can access the learning that has taken place in the classes that day. That previously wouldn't have happened. And we've got some young people who are not able to attend school for whatever reason, and they are accessing learning via these devices. So it's a single, it provides equity right across the authority. It's an essential tool in 2025 for learning and teaching, and I'm just not quite sure what our classrooms would look like if that infrastructure and that investment wasn't there. And my final point on that is that what you will notice in each of the inspection reports that are coming round, being independently, externally evaluated by HMI and the inspectors, there is a very strong feature of digital learning and the use of that technology coming through in the reports. And I'm delighted to see that, because that means the investment is paying off. Teachers are upskilled, kids are upskilled with the skills they need in order to move into those destinations. Thank you. If there are no other questions, we'll go to Councillor Sinclair as a portfolio holder.
Thank you, Provost. I'm not entirely sure how much more I can add to that. It's been a very full scrutiny session on this report. What I'd like to say about this, it's a very positive picture of how our young people are achieving, and whether that's through literacy and numeracy, the traditional SQA exam diet that we see or that we're used to and we know, or whether that's with the access our young people have to the broad curriculum and the wide pathway that we have here in Falkirk. One of the key messages coming through in this report is that Falkirk's story is incredibly strong, both locally and nationally. But what I'd like to say on that is that that's not a job done attitude. Focus improvement will be maintained, and I'm absolutely confident our education team and all of our sectors have a plan to do just that. It's also not an overnight success and an overnight process. It's down to a result. This is a result of the focus and hard work of everybody involved, which has led to these positive statistics, but also to a 5-year high in positive destinations of 96.25%. Finally, I'd like to pay tribute actually to our phenomenal young people who continue to achieve in what can be very challenging circumstances. Also to our central team for the support that they provide right across our secondary sector and wider. Last but absolutely not least, our dedicated secondary teams, and in particular our head teachers, for their relentless focus on achieving the best outcomes for our young people. It's a privilege, and I say that with genuine honesty, and I've said it many times here and in other committees, it is a privilege to work alongside our education teams and see excellence at work in keeping our children and young people in Falkirk at the very heart of everything we do. So thank you to everybody involved, and thank you all for this morning.
Thanks very much, Councillor Sinclair. I think everybody said the same. It's a wonderful report, and all credit to everyone involved in education. That continuous improvement, dedication to improve the lives of our pupils is phenomenal. And every teacher you speak to, you can feel their commitment and dedication, and their passion to want to teach their pupils and get the best outcome for it, because education does change lives. It's opportunity for people to, irrespective of what their home life might be like, to transform their life. And I don't think I've came across a teacher yet who doesn't want to be there. They're dedicated, just so dedicated and passionate. It's just, and if you think of the extracurricular activities that go on as well in all the schools, there's so much goes on. So just big thanks for everybody here, to everybody at education. Well done, and let's keep it going. So the recommendations are: members are asked to note 1, strong levels of attainment achieved by Falkirk Council secondary school leavers in 2024, and 2, key areas for improvement and the strategies in place to support further progress. Can we agree with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, just to ask members of the committee, do they want any follow-up briefings? John,
I would like a further report, please, Provost.
What was that on, Councillor Robertson?
I would like a further report if we can get one at a later date.
On
maybe the stretch aims.
Can I just STEM changes in the next report? So that's probably what we'll look at.
Yeah. Okay,
can I
just
maybe just untangle and rewind? Obviously, the committee beforehand indicated a desire to look under the bonnet, which I think successfully did, and got a lot of good answers and detailed answers. And Mr. Reid offered to do a briefing on some subjects. So perhaps if you could maybe leave it with myself and the Provost to talk to Mr. Reid and Jill just on what that briefing could be and the extent to which you could further explore the attainment issues that you talked about today, and then we can notify the committee how we'd be able to take that forward. Would that be satisfactory?
Agreed.
Councillor Binney's got her light on.
Councillor Binney?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, a lot of the data is aggregated, and obviously we've not to mention individual schools. That wouldn't be fair. But is there scope for a scrutiny panel to probe internally, and then obviously for the panel then to come come back to the scrutiny, you know, in a generic term, actually, because I do feel, you know, we've got a lot of surface information there, an awful lot of information in depth, actually, what's actually happening. You know, for me, numbers is good, and it's been a fantastic report. Staff must be commended, but I need to know kind of what's happening, so internally, how we actually achieve, you know, all these figures. So it's just a thought. So I'll leave it up to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Probably just to say at this point, it wouldn't be appropriate to look at the scrutiny panel. I think the best way is to just, as members have indicated, they're happy to do so, is just to allow us to speak to Mr. Reid and see the best way to allow you to probe further. I think if members went back and looked at this recording, they'd find there was an awful lot of detail that you probably need to just kind of get their head around and understand, and then we can have a follow-up session or whatever we think's the best way, so we can do exactly as you say. But just now.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Councillor Sinclair.
Yeah, so I'm not a member of the Scrutiny Committee, but one of my observations this morning is that the information that members require to understand the benchmarking of qualifications in Scotland, the landscape has somewhat changed certainly since I was at school anyway. I wonder if it's maybe worthwhile suggesting to the committee, or suggesting that a page brief or a 2-page briefing is sent out to all members on the Scottish Credit Qualifications Framework, the SQA, and what sets the foundation for our education curriculum offering in schools in Falkirk, if the committee were, or if that would be helpful for members, if it was felt that would be helpful for members.
It may be. I think that's the sort of discussion we'd have with Mr. Reeks. I think talking about face-to-face, let's just, if we can just leave it broad, we'll have a meeting to discuss that. And it may be information sheet that might be appropriate for all members. It's just a general, here's what's happening, what all these things mean. But if we could discuss that, I'm trying to work our way through it just now, I think. Better.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the agenda item. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Okay. Okay, welcome back everyone. We'll now move on to agenda item 6, Strategic Equity Funding Plan 2025-26, pages 35 in your agenda papers. We'll go to Jill to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to introduce our second paper for today, obviously in previous attainment reports that we've brought to scrutiny, we brought the Curriculum for Excellence, which is the broad general education data, and we've brought the levers data, which is the senior phase data. You'll know that there is an underpinning focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap. This particular paper has a very specific focus on that in terms of closing the poverty attainment gap. You may know that the Scottish government has a focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and it has a set an expectation for local authorities and schools to do the same. There is an umbrella term, the Scottish Attainment Challenge, under which all the different strands of closing the poverty-related attainment gap sits. So the Strategic Equity Fund is one of those strands. You may also be familiar with the pupil equity funding, which is given or is allocated directly to schools, and the care experience funding also sit within that umbrella term. So the Strategic Equity Fund paper which you're looking at today is around a fund which is allocated directly to local authorities. Local authorities then have to look at strategic priorities to try and close the poverty-related attainment gap at an aggregated level using local authority data. The way that which the local authority is measured is by selecting a basket of measures. So there are a basket of measures by which we are publicly accountable for closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And for each of those measures, we are expected to set what are called stretch aims. So those stretch aims essentially are very aspirational targets. They are targets which we should be reaching and no more if possible, because most targets there are there's an expectation we then just raise it. We raise the bar again in the pursuit of just continually closing that gap. But this paper progress with those measures. and how we are performing towards achieving those stretch aims. And it also tells you about the work streams that sit under that to try and improve those outcomes even further. The original type of plan was for stretch aims to be reached 6, so that was the end of term. Has subsequently been an announcement by Scottish Government that the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding will continue in some shape. We're not 100% sure about what that's yet. We know there's a breakdown between the Strategic Equity Fund, people equity funding and care experience funding, but essentially this paper takes us up to the end of, or takes our plan up to the end of 26, which was the original lifetime of what we were expected to do with the associated measures and stretch aims. So again, a really positive picture for Falkirk Council. I think what I would say is that there has been an underpinning in terms of equity and closing the poverty-related attainment gap. Schools have been very focused on it for several years. Local authority has been focused on it, but I think we have refreshed our focus on it. This new plan that you're looking at here is a much more rigorous plan than we have had in the past. It is much more focused on our aggregated attainment story in terms of making sure the funding is pointed exactly towards where we need to make improvements or where we need to continue to make improvements. On considering the work streams around it to make sure that we are continually revisiting all of these improvement priorities to make sure they are doing what they need to be doing. So hopefully you can see, first of all, that we are making good progress towards these stretch aims, but secondly also that we have a really rigorous plan to ensure that that is a relentless focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap in Falkirk. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I've got a question. One of Falkirk's focuses is on reducing the number of S4 leavers. The number of S4 leavers in the most deprived quintile has moved further away from target since 2019-20, and the gap between the most and least deprived S4 leavers has widened. I wonder if you could maybe say a wee bit about that.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. So what I would say is that, yes, I think it's a difficult conversation around fourth-year leavers, because sometimes there is an argument that it is the right thing for a young person to do to leave school. I think if young people have alternative pathways that are more suitable for them, i.e. they feel that they can get better qualifications in college, or there's a vocational qualification they might want to do that school can't do, or they are going to employment, then there is the argument that sometimes school is not the best place for that young person, and that is absolutely appropriate. I think what we are seeing, though, is that we are seeing sometimes that it might be that young people might opt to leave school because they might not have the opportunities in school that we might actually be able to provide them with. And I think we notice that trend to which you refer, and I think that with this renewed rigour on data and us looking at our improvement plan towards addressing these areas, I think that is something that we would agree is something that's probably not gone in the right direction, and is something that we are now really working on and focusing on the schools. Again, I know it's strategic equity funding, but the key messaging from this information analysis also informs the performance improvement meetings that we do with head teachers and secondary head teachers, and it is something we're doing to discuss almost pupil by pupil about whether these young people are appropriate to be leaving school, or whether there's something else we can do in schools to meet these young people's needs. Again, I think schools already have this on their radar, and we obviously have done this analysis of information to identify it as an area for improvement. And I think that what we are now doing is we're putting in place interventions to try and see if basically to try and improve that as an outcome, with a view to ensuring that we've got a wider range of opportunities for young people in the senior phase, out with the sort of core scope of SQA. What I would say is, though, that there's a number of areas that we're looking at that will improve outcomes for that cohort. We spoke previously about the Scottish Credit Qualifications Framework, partnership with college in terms of doing qualifications like HNCs while they're still in school. All of these things will contribute to hopefully a decrease in the number of young people who want to leave school at the end of S4. We know that our schools are exceptionally strong at adding value to our school, and I suppose the recognition of that is we need to try and keep our young people in for as long as possible to give them as much currency as we possibly can.
Thank you. I think it's a good idea being able to do an HNC when you're still in the school. You know, has that been going on for some time that you could do that, or is it a fairly new initiative?
So it's things that we're looking into at the moment in terms
Right.
of the possibilities. I think we have a newly invigorated team in the centre. So we have looked at additionality within the central team to try and support these types of pathways. We've spent a long time at understanding all the additional things we can do with partners so that our young people can stay enrolled within our schools, so that they've got the support mechanisms and the opportunities for pastoral support, etc., within their school environment where they feel safest, but also offering these partnership opportunities within the core of their senior phase. So I think we are trying to open the door in as many of these opportunities as possible. Another example of that would be our foundation apprenticeships, trying to look at foundation apprenticeships and how they can sit at the core, but meanwhile making sure that we've got that kind of core pastoral element and core support element these young people really benefit from by staying in school with. So I think that there are a whole range of these other opportunities that we're exploring at the moment, and as I say, with renewed focus at the central team on that, the developing the young workforce, so the alternative pathways provision within the centre. I would look to see more and more of these opportunities. I would hope to see more of these opportunities available for schools as we move forward.
Fantastic. We'll go to Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Jill, I'm just as regarding the core stretch aims. I wonder if you can answer the question. What's the current position on the core stretch aims, and how do we address any issues around, let's say, performance against targets, and how do you plan to meet these targets?
Thank you, Councillor. I think generally speaking, again, we have a strong picture towards our stretch aims, but by their nature, as we get better at them, I think we're just going to move the goalposts so that we're pushing and pushing and pushing. So it's a difficult discussion around whether or not it's actually a target per se, because ordinarily you would want a target that you would meet and then that would be achieved, whereas what we're saying is we want a constant pursuit of it getting better and better. So we set stretch aims which are notionally kind of achievable, but with a lot of work, and if we do achieve them, we move them on. But generally speaking, we are progressing well with stretch aims. I would expect to see them continue to improve given the renewed focus we have at centre on the sort of the equity agenda more generally. I think aside to the school programme, so we obviously do significant support and challenge with schools and discussions with schools around the performance improvement meetings. But in addition to that, Gail Martin-Brown on my right leads a team which are specifically focused around the governance and raising attainment around these stretch aims. So I'm sure we'll go into it in the fullness of this conversation, but we have several work streams specifically focused towards improving outcomes towards these stretch aims, and these sit within lead officers within the central team. And Gail will then work with those lead officers to sit and actually look at how these stretch aims are improving as these work streams continue. So in terms of how we're making sure that we're achieving these stretch aims, there is a renewed focus on governance. We do understand the importance of governance and the constant push. If we are to continue towards excellence, we need that constant push. We just need to keep it's on our agenda constantly, and we just need to keep pushing the boundaries to continue to close these gaps. But again, I suppose it's around what's happening in a school level. So this is underpinning the conversations that are happening at a school level on a day-to-day basis. And schools are working towards these stretch aims, but also within the local authority and the work streams that sit within the central team, and a constant focus on those stretch aims there as well. So hopefully collectively that will start to see a real improvement in these areas. Not to say they're not improving at the moment, but a renewed focus hopefully will mean an increased improvement rate.
Thank you, Jill.
Councillor Aiken.
Sorry, I'm not very sure if this is relevant to today's conversation. I think it is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why is it so important to close poverty-related attainment gap?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll answer that as best I can, I suppose. I think there is a recognition that young people from areas of deprivation or backgrounds of deprivation may experience barriers to learning that young people from areas of less deprivation may not experience. And as an education provider, it is crucial that we ensure that the high quality provision that we're providing for our young people is accessible to everybody in the same way. So essentially, we focus on high quality learning and teaching, we focus on high quality curriculum, we focus on raising attainment, we focus on strong leadership in our schools. But if we've got a group of young people who don't access that provision because of barriers to learning, because, for example, they haven't had breakfast in the morning and they don't have the energy to access what we're providing in school, or they don't have access to resources that they might need to access the learning, then what we're essentially doing is we're investing all of this resource into a provision which some young people can't access. So it's really important to make sure that whatever it is that we're providing is equally accessible to all young people, regardless of where they come from or what they have at home. So I suppose it's that relentless focus on, yes, this is the provision, but how do we make sure there is equitable access to that? Now, schools are very familiar with that on a day-to-day basis. Schools have been receiving PEF funding for a significant number of years now, and that is obviously a focus. So are you doing something in school? Does it cost something that some young people can't afford to do? How can we use PEF funding to make sure they can access it in the same way? And equally, CEF will do the same thing. It will look at improving outcomes and additional work streams, etc., that mean that the core provision that we are providing and focusing on is equally accessible, regardless of where young people come from. Thank you.
And maybe just add to that, Prof, if it's okay. Ultimately, it's about lifetime earnings and the impact that has on the individual's life, their family's life, and how that contributes to the wider prosperity of the area in which they're living. And there's a bit of research out there that shows if you give young people as many qualifications at as high a level as possible, it's kind of all correlated to how much more they will earn over their lifetime. And that's all obviously tied into health and other aspects of society as well. So that's the reason. It's a real moral drive to do it and to lift young people out of the situation that they're in and to try and offer them something better for their life.
Thanks for that. I just think it was kind of important for maybe people watching at home or who's going to watch this later on that they understand why it's so important that that attainment gap is lowered. But it kind of leads me on to my next question as well. Obviously, education is key in reducing the poverty-related attainment gap. But is there any other initiatives that we offer that give these kids life skills, as you were saying, to lift out poverty, like practical skills and budgeting and that sort of thing, food prep, planning, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we work in partnership with and through teams such as Fairer Falkirk and the Child Poverty Action Group that takes place in Falkirk. Through that, and in particular through direct work within schools, that's where we've managed to work to get support for budgeting for families. So the debt advisors will go in directly into schools and work. There's quite a few programmes that are across not just secondary but in primary, and we'll work in partnership with NHS Forth Valley, for example, to look at where education and health inequalities are similar and how we can start to reduce those. And we have brought in through partnerships quite good teams to do wraparound support for families, in particular for budget support and further welfare support that takes place as well. So all our schools are now in contact with those teams, and we've been very good at making sure that partnership is in place so that they can work together because they know them best to see which agencies and services can give that support.
That's brilliant, thanks very much. Up until I started doing this, I had no idea the work that goes into the schools and dealing with these kids that come from poverty, and I think it's absolutely fantastic what you are doing. Keep it up, it's amazing.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Thanks. I'd just like to add on to that a little bit before I ask my question, if it's okay. I left school before I was 15. I qualified as a chef. By the time I was 16, still a lot to learn, but by that age, I wasn't really into education too much until I saw a documentary with Jimmy Reid, the union guy who led the Upper Clyde workers, and he was standing in front of 4 blocks of flats in Glasgow, and he was telling the story about why it was so important for education. Swept his hand round there are hundreds of houses there, thousands of people. There could be brain surgeon, engineers, teachers, could all be in there, but hardly any of them are likely to achieve those things because the school over there is the one that they all go to and it achieves nothing. So those people are out of the equation. And what a terrible, terrible waste. And that's what he said, it was a waste. And it's a waste for our country if we don't do something about it. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. It takes me to the question. Page 38, section 2, 4 themes have been created to improve outcomes for people living in poverty. Could you expand a little bit on that one? Thanks.
Sorry, could you repeat which page you're referring to? Sorry.
Sorry,
Which bit?
page 38, section 6.2. 4 themes.
Yeah. Okay. If it's okay, can I pass over to Gail, who leads
Yeah,
on the work streams within the so it's
So we have got 4 different themes that we've set up as part of this, and that's all been addressed through where we've looked at not just the attainment gap, but also looking at wider data such as health inequalities as well. So first of all, we have the curriculum and learner pathways, which is looking at what we've talked about in the previous paper about changing and enhancing the curriculum for the senior phase. We've also have a programme in there which is looking at a transition teacher between primary and secondary, and that's within the Falkirk cluster. That's our cluster, as we all know, that is the highest element of deprivation. So that's looking at how we can change and early intervention that can take place, of really learning from what's happening in the broad general curriculum and targeting some schools, pupils that need that support at a much earlier level in order to gain higher qualifications. And then we have within the Graham cluster and the Falkirk cluster a mentoring pathways programme, and that's working with organisations such as MCR Pathways, which works with young people that are living both in poverty and those that are from a care experience background, of working with the likes of the people that you've talked about just now. So those that can inspire them, those that are coming from backgrounds of different agencies of work as well that can mentor those young people. So there's a collection there within the first theme of how we're looking to change the curriculum and support and being much more targeted in that approach that we're looking at. We then have pedagogy and professional development, and the big focus for this year is going to be in literacy and in particular for numeracy, looking at a solid programme that will come in to upskill our staff to make sure that they're confident within broad general and senior phase, but in particular within broad general of that work, and bring in staff from schools that are highly skilled in there, that we can put together really good training and mentorships for our staff, so that when this funding does stop, actually our improvement can still continue and there's a real depth of learning that takes place. Our third part is learner engagement. That's some of what we've talked about earlier. That's a real focus on attendance. When we've spoken to schools over the years, we've looked at 3 tiers of attendance. Your 85 to 100% is quick changes that can take place in order to turn attendance around. Schools are more than equipped to take that forward. Where we focused on is under 85%. So we have put a family of staff that are within every cluster. Falkirk actually has more, because we have been both reactive and looking at where the demands are and what's happened. The team's only been in place for 5 months, but we've made some really great roads of change there. They're members of staff that are working side by side with schools, but directly with families, and being that go-between, that advocate for the families and for wider services for how we can get further support and they will work with under 84% attendance, and they'll also work with care experience. What we're seeing there is that the majority of times, and in particular when attendance or non-attendance has been persistent, it's not a quick fix, and it's not necessarily a change that's just directly about the pupil not necessarily engaging in school or wanting to come to school. Most often it's quite complex welfare issues that are sitting at home, of which our team would then go in, work with families, understand what the root cause of that attendance is. They would work with the children as well, and the school will support that child in order to change the relationship that's happening. But also they will put in referrals and systems in place in order to change the outcomes for those families. Is it things such as they're needing a benefit calculator team to work with them because there's a real concern? So we know that sometimes attendance is caused by poverty within a household that they feel they can't afford sometimes to send their child, or mental health is decreasing because of poverty, and they're not at the capable element of being able to make sure that everybody's out the door. They need that support, they need that place. Whilst our team is a tier 1 team, they're there for the immediate support. They will not be mental health professionals, so it's about making sure that agencies such as FIDAM can give support to that family. They can put it in so that they're decreasing those barriers to then allow that child to attend school and be in a much better place. And they'll work, the referrals will come in, but they'll also work hand in hand, and they're working with ones that they're able to change around within an 8-week period to 12-week. Some are much more complex, and they've become that, and they're a very good skilled team to make sure that we can improve outcomes for young people, but also we can take that strain away from schools, because time and time again, schools are expected to be more than just an education service, where other services, maybe thresholds are increasing, the capacity is less and less. Schools are expected. We're the only constant that still see that child on a day-to-day basis. So that member of staff then comes in to try and reduce that strain, to allow management time within the school to concentrate on attainment, and for us to take over that welfare element, because most of the time it's well-being that needs to be improved in order for that child to be back in school. So that's a new team that's been put in place. Every cluster has one. Falkirk actually have 3, and that's again because of the need. So the new part of the Falkirk team is that we have someone that's within early years, and that's about prevention, because we recognise sometimes there's multiple children within those families, and before they get to the stage of being S3 in poor attendance, which is really, really difficult to turn around, can we actually look at referrals that at the age of 3, a member of staff works with that family, improves those outcomes much earlier on. So actually the cost of spend from a monetary point of view is much less later on, but the prospects for that child changes. So that's what we're doing in terms of learner engagement. And then we have understanding the impact of poverty, which we're looking at a policy that will come out very soon of the cost of the school day. Again, making sure that our schools truly understand those barriers. And it's not to stop things such as school trips, because absolutely we would not want to do that. You're wanting to raise aspirations and opportunities and participation, but making sure that we have very clear guidance and understanding of, to do that, you need to make sure that there's funding in place for children that may need extra support, or to pay for them fully. And also out with that school day, how that impacts that child in order for them still to be able to learn and to be in a good place. And we've got a central team of staff on top of that, that then make sure that drives forward, that they can provide the data in order for our schools to be able to make sure that they can plan better and they can react and support what's in place. So that's the kind of main breakdowns of what we're doing with the funding.
Thank you for that, convener. I've got one more question, if that's okay.
Hey, Jill wanted to
I
come.
don't know whether it's to Jill or...
Can I just,
Yeah,
is it okay
sure.
if I just,
Please.
just one last bit? I mean, that's obviously Gail's working very closely with these themes, and there is a lot, I hope you can see there's a lot of really targeted focused work that sits under that. So those are the 4 main themes. And we spoke previously about the work streams that sit underneath those 4 themes. Gail's obviously done a great job at detailing all those work streams, and those are the things I was referring to previously, that we've got a really strong governance process around, and Gail's leading on the governance around those. So where things are needing a nudge, or they were seeing things not starting to work, that's very much, we've set up an infrastructure so that we can react to that, to try and make sure that it's constantly focusing on the things that we need to focus on. So I think there's 12 work streams sit underneath those 4 main themes, and we can add and kind of adapt within those work streams as we need to. But each one of the work streams are led by a lead officer. So there is somebody with an accountability role within each of those work streams to make sure they're constantly improving outcomes for those cohorts. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. It really was between the two of you. Fantastic answer. An awful lot of information. On page 45, there's 3 graphs. The third one, the graph between the most and the least deprived pupils achieving one or more qualification at SCQF level 5 has widened since 2019-2020. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how we're going to be able to improve it? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, certainly. So you'll remember in 1990-20 and 1920-21, we had alternative certification, and we had obviously COVID, and we had an environment where we didn't have high stakes young people sitting in an exam hall doing their exams in a traditional sense. So what we had to do with schools is essentially set up a situation where young people were able to exemplify their learning in a different way. So the way that they did that is they were able to gather evidence of achievement over a range of a period of time, and then teachers used professional judgment and understanding standards expertise developed through years of delivering SQA qualifications to assign grades to young people in a different way. We couldn't sit in exam halls, we couldn't do that because of the COVID thing. So that was the way that we alternatively certificated young people. And what we found in those stages is that alternative certification benefited young people from more deprived backgrounds more. So because of the nature of the way that the evidence was gathered, young people, it benefited young people generally in terms of that way, because in an end of a final exam, you can have a young person that sits in an exam and has a really bad day, and they've done well all year, and then they don't, and that's obviously through an appeals process, etc. But through alternative certification, that wasn't as big a thing because it wasn't a high stakes day. So generally speaking, 1920 and 2021 the attainment was higher because of that. And it's not because things were easier, it's just because it was a different way to assess young people. Particularly deprived young people benefited from that as a process. So what you'll see there is you'll see a peak in 1920, 2021, and then there was a little bit of a slide because of the recovery from that. But what we're starting to see is that because we are focusing on this as an area for improvement, we're starting to see it pick up again. And we would hope in this current set of exams where young people are sitting exams at the moment, that will start to recover again. But we particularly see that where we're measuring a 5-year trend, and 2 of those years are COVID years, because those young people did benefit from that alternative certification model a little bit more. So it's almost like it's an artificial peak rather than it being a downward trend now. You see what I mean? That makes sense.
Thank you. I did have an inkling that it might have been something to do with COVID, but thank you for that.
Thanks very much, Councillor Forrest. Councillor Binney?
Thank you, Provost. And to be honest, I don't know if you'll be able to answer that. I've kind of got a kind of split question, which is kind of related. Obviously, we're talking about the poverty attainment gap, and I'm thinking what's happening in our area is a matter of fact as well, because it's all linked. Children have parents probably that go to work and earn money and things like that, and that does affect family circumstances and how the whole family feels, really, I would say. So regarding the SEF funding, the strategic equity funding, and you might not be able to answer this, but can you put a case in for more funding over the year for our council area? Perhaps it's not needed, but now knowing what's happening to the local economy with obviously big industry all over the council area sort of closing down, and lots of people will be made redundant. Obviously, contractors as well will have less work, because obviously this could have an impact on their families. So basically, is there a case for more funding, or is it something we've not thought about or we don't need? Thank you. That's my first part.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. So in the first instance, so both SEF funding and PEF funding are allocated per local authority and per school using a formula. So there is an overall pot at Scottish Government level which is allocated to the Scottish Attainment Challenge. And then there is a funding formula applied involving pupil role, deprivation areas, etc., which then allows the Scottish Government to allocate per school, PEF funding, and per local authority SEF funding. So that is a top line funding which we are just downloaded. So it's not like a bid for scenario, and the likelihood is that that won't change, because I think the Scottish Government obviously feel it's fairer to be allocating per funding formula. But what we can do at local authority level is we can flex within the funding allocation we have to try and target towards these types of things if we see that that is having an impact for young people. So I think one of the obviously the funding is fairly set. It has increased over the last few years. So the way that they allocated funding previously, they realised wasn't quite hitting the mark. So it was revised, and they looked at a different funding model through the Strategic Equity Fund, which is slightly fairer in terms of looking at the entire demographic of the council. But within that pot, I'm confident that we are looking at a really rigorous analysis of our data to understand where the real areas need to be targeted. I think that we have really focused on ensuring we're rigorously analysing our gaps, and we've got a much better understanding of where those sit. And I'm confident that we are pointing the SEF funding towards the right things, but also we've introduced an element of flex and dynamicism within the system to allow us to address things if we see they're coming up, or if we need to change away from something that's not working. I'm confident we're set up to do that. I think Gail wanted to add in there. That's okay.
Yeah, just, we're not in a position to be able to bid for any more funds, because it's set, and actually when pupil equity, for example, first came out, it was assessed each year, and the funding did fluctuate. It was then set at a limit 4 years ago, which actually makes better planning for schools, although it doesn't take into account what our day-to-day poverty is in terms of poverty figures for 25-26. What we do as a team is we will work alongside other agencies and organisations. So there's only obviously so much, there's a limit to what education can do and education funding can provide. But through groups such as the Child Poverty Action Group, it's about working with multi-agencies to then identify, is there ways of which we could maybe take some of this funding that we could bring together to change outcomes. So for example, if there's a certain area where we are seeing that there is higher deprivation, higher poor health outcomes, etc., can we work together in bringing some of that funding to make sure that we're working in true partnership, because we can't change it on our own. And that's continuous talks that take place, and we have planning, and we're able to create that. So whilst the funding itself doesn't change, we can use it almost to build with other funds that we could look at as well.
Well, I'm delighted to see that we see the big picture and we've got a lot of flex. That's very good indeed, actually. Thank you for that. Another wee part of the question kind of relates is, and you might not know the answer for this either. You state in the report, PEF in our schools will continue to have ownership of the direct source of funding. Will it continue in the long term? As I can see, the award of SEF has significantly increased year on year. As I say, in the past, I've heard just about PEF, and obviously it's just come to me recently. We're talking about SEF now, and obviously, I think it happens quite a lot in organisations. There's sort of amalgamation, but maybe you don't know the answer to that. So it was just really to ask that question. Do you think it will continue long term? But the answer, I'll leave the answer to yourself. Thank you.
Long term, until recently, there was no guarantees beyond 2026, because obviously there's a potential change of government in May 2026. However, through Parliament over the past month or so, there has been an agreement to continue the full of the attainment challenge, which we're waiting on guidance as to the detail of until 2027, and then it will be up to the new government as to what happens. Obviously, poverty is not changing, but it is at government level. To answer your question of changes to SEF actually only came in 3 years ago, and as Jill was saying earlier, it's because there was a review prior to SEF. There was 9 local authorities that received funding who were deemed as the highest elements of deprivation across Scotland. And then there was some schools that were then allocated attainment challenge funding. So Falkirk was in that position that we had Langley's Primary School and Falkirk High that received funding, and then our other schools received PEF on its own. That was then reviewed and they called it SAC 2.0. And what happened was the 9 authorities that were sitting with quite a few million each year was then changed, that every local authority would then receive strategic equity funding. So they have had to taper down the funding to those 9 authorities rather than removing it right away. And that's how ours has increased over the years. So it meant potentially is you have got the highest amount and then it could stop after it, which are then creating the biggest demand, which is part of the challenge that we work for as a team to look at how we can create sustainability. But that's why the funding's increasing over the years rather than it just being a direct amount each year that sustains.
Thank you, very informative. Thank you, Provost.
Councillor Binney, I'll just come in with a promise permission. Just to add there that I think there is a growing view that CEF funding, PEF funding is not additional funding that it may have been classed as when it was first introduced, that it's actually core funding now. And a lot of the things we're talking today about improvements and outcomes across a whole range of measures and positive destinations and subjects in schools, all of that takes skilled intervention and skilled programmes to be implemented, and if you want that to happen, then you have to pay for it. And if the funding were to stop, then I don't think we would be sitting here today having the same conversation about the improvement in outcomes. And that's about individual young people, because behind all these statistics, there are families and individual young people whose life chances would be affected in a negative way. So if that were to be the national position, then we would need to come back and have local conversations about the way forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Aiken.
Sorry, me again. The budget for financial year 25-26, so it's obviously broken down into the 4 themes. But what I noticed was understanding the impact of poverty has been allocated 3,000. That just seems awfully low compared to what the other 3 have received. Could you maybe explain why that is?
I have to say that over all of the elements of not just CEF but PEF, the Care Experience Fund, all of that underpins understanding the impact of poverty. It's just there's a particular focus on theme 4, and that's about creating the cost of the school day document and the equity fund hub. So actually a lot of that work is work that will happen as part of our existing teams, which is why we don't need extra funding. It's just really to pay for the resource of creating the actual hub itself. And the document for it to be created and putting in additional resources, but the work itself in terms of the delivery will already exist within existing teams and within schools. So that's why it doesn't need funded. It becomes sustainable. It's just that initial part for any print, any additional resources that need to be required in order to make sure that everyone has that understanding. So it's just a small nominal amount where the majority of the learning will come from actual people's understanding of it and how they integrate that into their day-to-day work.
That's brilliant. I kind of thought that was the answer, but I just wanted to clarify it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, just to come in there as well. Thanks, Gail. So that particular piece of work was because one of our schools had identified good practice. So there was an external body in the school that identified that we had one of our secondary schools who had really strong practice in that area. So what we have done then is we've said, right, okay, if we need to learn from this, if we've got a school with highly effective practice, how do we then use that as a resource to try and then sort of expand out to all our schools? So Gail's right, we're relying on really innovative things that are happening in our school anyway, being better networked to understand where the pockets of highly effective practice are happening, and then almost creating policy around that or guidance around that then allows other schools a framework into which they can develop as well. So that's existing members of school level teams. So they're not actually central staff. It's work that's happening in school that we're almost using a bit of their time to try and then expand that out across the authority. So we are really lucky in that we are identifying these pockets of highly effective practice that we're able to roll out and it is a cost-effective way of kind of building capacity, and that's what we're trying to do as much of as possible. Gail spoke about sustainability. That's where sustainability comes in, because we've already got highly effective practice and we're just drawing on that and expanding it across the entire authority. Sorry to interrupt there, thank you.
We'll now go to Councillor Robertson. Okay, so we'll go to Councillor McCabe next, and we'll wait to see if Councillor Robertson comes back.
He was there 2 minutes ago. I don't know where he's disappeared. Thank you. The whole aspect of the SEF funding I find that absolutely fascinating. I had a number of kind of queries about it. I think between the three of you, you've probably answered most of them. I could just look for a wee bit of clarity on it. It's actually paragraph 4.4 within the report here, where it identifies 300,000, 600,000, 990,000, 1.3 million. Substantial numbers, substantial increases. My question, I mean, this was a couple of weeks ago, was why? What's the underlying reason for that? How are they arrived at, these figures? Do we have to apply for funding? My core question really was, is this locally driven, or is it Scottish Government driven, if you like? You know, is it drop-down funding, or is it us seeking funding? I think you've explained a good bit of it, but you could maybe just expand on it a wee bit more. And again, just to pick up on a point that you made, John, I think my fear is that, you know, we would need to be applying for this funding every year. But what you potentially are alluding to, I hope, is that this is now almost core funding. This is not additional funding. And as you mentioned, you know, had we not had this funding, we'd be having a whole different discussion about the earlier agenda item, if you like. Yeah, just a wee bit of expansion would be good, I think. Thanks, Convener.
Absolutely. Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Councillor McCabe. The reason for the increase in funding is due to what Gail alluded to earlier, and it's a change in the mechanism by which the Scottish Government have distributed that funding across local authorities and then within local authorities. So that's the difference. And it was to make sure that local authorities and schools that were previously receiving big sums of money, that they weren't suddenly left with nothing. So it was a kind of phased change to the allocation of that funding. So it just comes to us. We know what our allocation for SEF funding is. Our allocation for PEF funding, which goes directly to schools, is around, from memory, 3.8 million. It's around that, and that's distributed directly to schools. That's the funding. All of this funding would have stopped in March 26, but we now know it's going to continue for another year, and then it will be up to whoever is elected and whatever the priorities are as to the mechanism for that. What I was alluding to is the fact that, do you know, that when the funds were first introduced, it was such a lot of money, and I think across Scotland, people were like, "Well, how are we going to deal with this?" Because it's a big sum of money across the country. But the demands that are placed on schools and the issues and problems that schools are trying to address, and it isn't just as a result of the pandemic, it's as a result of a whole load of other changes in society. But the expectation is that schools will be there and schools will pick up things to enable young people to attend, to help their family out, to make sure that they are offered all the opportunities. So that work can't stop, but that work is funded. Much of it is driven and funded by this money. And that's why I'm referring to it as people thinking of it as just being core funding, because I don't think people can imagine not doing that type of work to help young people and help families. But it isn't core funding. It is allocated on the basis that I've just described for another year, and then the decision will come about what happens after that. But something is going to have to plug the gap, because those problems are not going to go away, and those young people still need to be helped.
Thanks very much.
Just to add to that as well, we took part in a consultation with Scottish Government last year when they were reviewing this, and the civil servants were putting together a report on the totality of the Scottish Attainment Challenge, and we asked them to come and visit 7 schools to give a range of the work that was taking place. Some authorities, it was a 45-minute telephone call. We insisted that they came to visit us centrally and to our schools. And we know that that report has made a significant influence on the full of the Attainment Challenge continuing until 2027. And what the feedback from our schools, from everyone that they've spoken to, from the children, the staff, any parents that were there, was how vital this funding was. And if this funding was removed, we would fail some of our children and families. And that's the significance of it when John's talking about that element of core.
Thank you. Thank you for the answers. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Sorry, Convener. My questions had actually been answered.
Okay. I was going to ask a question on governance. I see at the back quite a strong report on governance, how it's administered and how it's in the report to the Scottish Government and how you track the stretch aims and stuff like that. So having read that, I've not really got a question around that. I'm just a bit concerned how do we look at that? And it says an annual report to the Scottish Government. So is there one on PEF funding as well, the Scottish Government?
There's a financial annual report for PEF that goes to the Scottish Government. They don't have a full element of a report school by school, but that's what our stretch aims contribute to. And obviously any of our attainment data that shows the gap, that's what they judge it on. Our schools will pull together their own reports, and we will look at that as well in terms of the impact. But from a government point of view, there's not a full report. They simply don't have the administration in order to pull together for the thousands of schools it would be.
Could we maybe see the report on PEF, SEF?
Yeah, it would be part of our standards and quality report that it's included within there.
Right, okay, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Jill, my apologies.
Not at all, apologies. It was just to add as well that we have an Education Scotland attainment advisor. So Education Scotland allocate an attainment advisor per local authority, which is an employee of Education Scotland, to work in partnership with us around our SEF, our PEF and our care experience funding. And that attainment advisor is also a mechanism by which Scottish Government look for information from us around the governance of our processes around all of those areas. The attainment advisor also has to produce a biannual report to Scottish Government around our progress with these areas. So although it's not like a public report through this type of environment, we are accountable and our governance is accountable through those mechanisms as well. So that's a partnership arrangement with Education Scotland through our attainment advisor.
Councillor Berry.
I'll ask a quick question because I know we've spoken quite a lot this morning, but it's been good. It's been really positive. Can you mention or name one initiative that has increased the poverty attainment gap significantly? So that would be interesting to know from my point of view and probably my colleagues here today.
Did you mean reduced, Councillor Berry?
Yes, reduce, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think what we're saying at the moment is that up until the point where this new plan was in place, I think there have been a variety of interventions that have been in place and bits and pieces in schools that have contributed to supporting our stretch aims. But just since we've done the more rigorous analysis of the data and really kind of reviewed the governance processes, I think probably our attendance interventions have started to have probably the most noticeable impact. The reason for that is because attendance is something that you can measure quite quickly. So if young people aren't attending, you put an intervention in place and they start attending, that's quite a quick turnaround in terms of impact. Whereas a lot of the other things that we're measuring are attainment related, and the attainment related measures don't really come through till these young people are doing exams 3, 4, 6 years later. So again, it's quite a difficult question to answer in terms of impact, because we are seeing impact in terms of more lower level, not lower level, smaller level measures and outcomes. So for example, we might say that we're going to measure pupil confidence in a particular work stream, and that's going to be one of our measures and outcomes, and we're going to say we want to see an increase in pupil confidence, which is going to be an increase in well-being, which is going to increase their attainment. So we'll have soft measures and outcomes that we are using, which show us that we're all moving in the right direction. But I think probably the most notable external measures that we're talking about through these stretch aims, probably the one that we're starting to see impact with is the attendance side of things. But I guess that's probably just because that's the one that happens straight away, whereas the attainment sometimes takes a bit longer to kind of come through to fruition. Overall, I think we are seeing impact across all the work streams and all the measures. But I guess it'll take a little bit of time to feed through into the sort of the high level attainment messaging. However, we are confident that they're heading in the right direction.
I'm really pleased to hear that, and I'm really pleased to hear about the attendance as well. So hopefully that will be improved in schools with all these funds. But thank you.
Any other questions? John?
I'm just thinking, as Joel was talking there, the best way to describe it is about the picture that we're trying to paint. And we're trying to paint a really positive picture in all these different measures with all these different young people in all of our schools. But that picture is made up of lots of different pieces of a jigsaw. And so some of the pieces are a bit bigger than others, but actually they're all contributing to that overall picture. And if we didn't have those individual pieces and those individual bits of the jigsaw, then we wouldn't have that complete picture that we're seeing today. You ask one question, you get 3 answers. There you go. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, I'd just like to say it's an interesting comment that Councillor Forrest made about Jimmy Reid. I remember that, and one of the things he said was these kids in these tenement blocks are not getting an opportunity. It's quite clear, I've listened to everything today, that pupils of today are getting every opportunity possible. And that's remarkable, and the PEF and the SEF funding go a long way to that. And I've heard a few examples of how the PEF funding's been used, some of the head teachers. It's quite remarkable when you hear how it's getting used and the difference it makes. So long may that continue. So I think we're heading in the right direction again with the stretch aims and everything else. And I think this funding that's here is really crucial to moving things forward. And we've heard a lot about that today, and it's all positive, you know. So I'll just now go over the recommendations. Members were asked, 1, to acknowledge the progress made towards achieving the local authority's Strategic Equity Fund stretch aims, and 2, note the Strategic Equity Fund plan for 25-26. Can we agree with the recommendations?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. So that now closes the meeting. So thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you.